was a lot of fun, and I spent a lot of time talking to taxi drivers and taxi lineups, asking them about their mobile devices and whether they'd want to use it. So I learned a lot about the taxi industry. I had no idea that this would be one of the hottest private companies of this decade.
Welcome to the Invention Stories Podcast, where we share stories of inventors who turn their idea into a product. Please visit our website at www.inventionstories.com. And now, from the Invention Stories Podcast World Headquarters Studios in Morro Bay, California, is our host, Robert Baer.
Welcome to the Invention Stories Podcast. I am your host, Robert Baer, and thank you for joining us. I would like to introduce you to our very first sponsor of the Invention Stories Podcast, the Socket Saver. Do you have loose wall sockets in your house? The Socket Saver is an easy, safe, and effective solution for you. Please visit their website, www.socketsaver.com. You're listening to episode 19 of the Invention Stories Podcast, Jamie Sutherland and Sonix. The show notes for this episode have been transcribed using Sonix and are available at www.inventionstories.com. Jamie Sutherland co-founded and launched Canada's first mobile taxi hailing app, TaxiNow, that was acquired by FastCab. He was the president of Xero US, where he helped it grow from a market capitalization of $200 million to $2.5 billion. Jamie is now the co-founder and CEO of Sonix Inc. Transcribing and editing audio and video is painful, and Sonix makes it really fast, refreshingly simple, and remarkably affordable. I'm grateful for the opportunity to interview someone so successful on the Invention Stories podcast, so let's get started. Jamie, thank you for joining us today. I want to start off by asking, what kind of child were you? Did you enjoy figuring out how things worked, or were you invested in computers or artificial intelligence?
So I got bored easily and liked being active, found myself always doing something. And in terms of computers, my first experience was with a Commodore 64, and that wasn't really anything more than playing games. But we got good at copying games and getting as many games on diskettes as possible. And then I got into, creating our own games, but that was offline, not with a computer. And lots of things around creating board games and building furniture and building wood constructs, largely influenced by my father. So, one of the funniest things I built was a skateboard. And so at the time, I don't think we had skateboards where we live, but we had roller skates and also had wood. So combined some wood with some carpet and attached a roller skate to the bottom and then sat on that going down some hills. So that was a lot of fun. So I guess the story goes, yes, I like to build things and create things. I just found it a lot of fun and rewarding.
Right on. I just wanted to start off with a little bit of, background first before we got into it. Did you have any family members who are entrepreneurs or inventors?
No, I didn't. But I was always inspired by creators that were around me. And I think building things like my father did around the house was a lot of fun for me. And so, it was more the creation of things that I found, that whole process I found interesting. And I think if I look back when I was younger, my vocation probably would have been as an architect or an engineer, but I feel like I was encouraged to do business, and that started early on, even in high school. But if I was to go back, I think that's something I would have enjoyed more than just simply business degrees.
Can't blame you. I was a business major myself. It got awfully dry, and I had a lot of fellow students of mine were political science majors and liberal arts. They looked like they were having a whole lot of fun. Now, I noticed that you went to college. You're from Canada, right?
That's correct.
Yes. And it looked like you went and did your undergraduate degree about 10 years later. You went for your master's or your MBA. And I'd like to ask you about TaxiNow. How did you get into that?
TaxiNow, that was a venture we started in Vancouver, and I think it was a real pain that we were having getting taxis in Vancouver because the supply of taxis was limited. So what TaxiNow was it was the first iPhone app that allowed you to hail a taxi from a mobile device in Canada. And there were some apps in the US that were doing this, so we weren't the first to think about it. But I saw the potential of that and truly believe there should have been a global taxi brand. And so if you get off the plane in a different city, it should be just one app that helps you connect to a taxi that's closest to you. And so we sought out to build that, and I just felt like it was something that was going to happen. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And we built that, and we got it running, and we had several hundred taxis that were with taxi brands, and we were kind of a layer on top to connect passengers and drivers. And it was working in Vancouver, but it was a difficult market, and it still is. Actually, Vancouver is one of the cities where Uber does not exist today because of the regulations around. So it was a foray into that, but I think it was a tough market. And what happened was we ended up selling the company to another company that was working on the same thing in Canada, and then I moved to another opportunity, which was Xero.
All right. Were you like the person coding, or what was your role with TaxiNow? Did you do different things, or were you a sales part of it?
I was more on the business side, and I was working with a co-founder that doing all the technology, and we had a few other people working for us part-time, but it was mostly business and getting the thing up and running.
Was that a good memory for you, or did you learn lots of lessons? Or it sounded like you sold, so it did.
It was a lot of fun, and I spent a lot of time talking to taxi drivers and taxi lineups, asking them about their mobile devices and whether they'd want to use it. So I learned a lot about the taxi industry. I had no idea that this would be one of the hottest private companies of this decade. But, I knew something was brewing. But that's neither here nor there. Xero was also a good run.
I'd like to ask you about Xero. So how did you wind up with Xero, and how many people were there when you joined Xero?
So when I joined, Xero was probably under 300 people, if I recall. And it actually started outside the U.S. It started in New Zealand. And I was at a company called Sage in the North American market and we always had them on our radar, but because they were the world and it was still quite small, didn't pay attention to them. And then I got connected with the CEO and we had a conversation about what they were doing. And I think everything I was pushing Sage towards in terms of cloud, in terms of accountant-centric accounting software, in terms of collaboration was the future. And they were doing that already. And so it wasn't really, again, for me, a matter of whether this was going to happen, because I could tell and knew that would be the future. It's just a matter of who would do it first in the U.S. market. And so we really hit it off and ended up relocating me to San Francisco to kick off the U.S. operations. And it was exactly what we expected. A lot of interest in what we were doing, especially the accountants looking for more collaborative ways to work with their clients, and also small businesses that are on the go and don't want to be spending time on a Sunday night doing some bookkeeping when they could do that standing in line throughout the week while they're at Starbucks, for example.
I'm not even sure what the cloud exactly is. It seems like not only do you exactly know what it is, but you were one of the really early adapters. When is it that you discovered the cloud? When did that realization that this is a really important innovation, when did that strike you?
Yeah, that's probably pre-2000. I don't remember exactly when, but it seemed to me that the technology was so revolutionary that it was going to impact every single industry on this planet. And that's pretty much what has happened, and it still continues to do so. And with accounting specifically, a tax and accountant is typically an industry that lags behind everything else. So yes, we were at the forefront of that industry, mostly because that industry is just so slow to move. The nature of those that are doing accounting and finance work is relatively risk averse. And so adopting new technologies is not the first thing that they would opt to do, whether or not it was going to increase their productivity. But yeah, it was, and at least in the US, we pushed the agenda forward around cloud as it relates to accounting.
Yeah, you could say that again, risk averse. That's definitely a great word to describe the accounting industry, but at the same time, the bottom line is another word or two words to describe the industry too. And if you're saving the money and time, it makes a whole lot of sense. How did you go from being just a worker for Xero to being the president and then being the GM?
Right. Well, so starting the U.S. office, there was nothing in the U.S. and we needed to build it from scratch. Now, what we had was operations in Australia and New Zealand. And so there was a bit of framework established in terms of how we bring on customers and service customers, as well as obviously some product that was tailored to those markets. So it was really just about addressing the needs of the U.S. market and growing the team there. And we grew quite quickly and had fundraisers throughout the process to help accelerate that growth. And then after about 3 years or 3.5 years, I wanted to get closer to the product. And one of the bigger challenges we had was just adapting to the U.S. market. And so that's where the general manager role came in. And then we also launched a new product to a new market and opened up the doors for Xero to what has been coined the gig economy or the contractor economy. So freelancers that are earning money, but it's not very much. And so a full-blown accounting system isn't necessary. So we built a mobile application called TaxTouch, which allowed a user to, it's kind of funny, we called it Tinder for taxes. You would swipe right for a business expense and automatically categorize it, and then swipe left for personal. And at the end of the year, what you'd have is a Schedule C that you could file along with your taxes, saving a bunch of headache and work at the end of the year for that market. And that market is roughly 23 million users in the U.S. So big market, big opportunity. And that's the kind of thing that just gets me excited. It's how do we grow these businesses? How do we build these businesses, building these products and impacting lots of users and just obviously making them happy.
Was everything run through you as far as like when you're the president, and this sounds like pretty good sized business by the time you left, somebody may have come up with ideas, but were you like the decision maker saying this goes, we're going to follow this path, we're going to do that? And were you the bottom line, the buck stops here guy?
Yes and no. It's always a collaborative effort, at least the way I like to run teams. And we do have teams in different parts of the world. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, the U.S. fell under my jurisdiction.
Before you came to San Francisco, were you living in Vancouver? Is that true? You went from Vancouver to San Francisco? Is that
yes.
Okay. Was that like a culture shock for you? How's it different being there versus in Vancouver? Is it easier to get work done? Is it?
Yeah, the bigger difference was moving from Toronto to Vancouver. I think the East Coast to West Coast, you see bigger differences. Vancouver versus San Francisco is not that different, with the exception of San Francisco being the epicenter for technology. I feel like you have similarities in terms of coastal environmental surroundings and what people are attracted to that type of area. Both are beautiful places. But in San Francisco, the driving force here and the kind of the lifeblood of what happens. And what struck me when I first moved here was much people were trying to change the world, if you will. So many people building companies, and you couldn't go to a coffee shop and not see working on their next idea and overhear conversations about their startup. And, that environment, it's invigorating, and I think it's, special, and you don't have that in too many places. Now, I think we've seen over the last decade a lot more tech clusters build throughout the world and in the U.S., and I think that's a good thing. So, but yeah, that's between Vancouver and San Francisco, not a ton of difference other than really cool, interesting things happening and great companies being built in San Francisco, whereas you kind of have more satellite offices in Vancouver.
I just wondered because I see Vancouver as the Canucks, and just wondered what life must be like and how it's different. When you were at Xero, you mentioned something on your LinkedIn page about a new offering that is patent pending. Did you go through a lot of patenting while you were there with the new products and the new ideas that you had? That
was the TaxTouch product I was referencing before, and No, we weren't big on patents, and it was probably more in the later years I was there that we started looking at patenting some things. Some people are for patents, some people were against them. We were sort of dabbling in it, and yes, there was a number of things that we were working on that we thought should be defended, and we filed a few patents, but it comes with a lot of other administrative work and costs, and so I'd say we were fairly neutral. We didn't have a heavy patent strategy.
Okay. Jamie, what is Sonix?
So let me start by saying transcribing and editing audio and video is painful. We hear that from our users all the time. And what we do is we make it fast, easy, and affordable. It's as simple as that. And so what we do is we automatically transcribe an audio or a video file, and then we can do it in less time than the length of the recording at a fraction of the traditional cost. And so I'd say a great example is a user like yourself, which is a podcaster, and they like the service because we can create an easy way for them to convert a podcast into text form. And then if you can post that text on your website or other platforms, you get indexed far better with text than audio. And that drives better search engine optimization, which then results in better traffic. And so I've talked to many podcasters and to meet one that doesn't want more listeners. And an easy way to do that is to have your text version of your podcast somewhere on your website.
Just a reminder, the show notes for this episode have been transcribed using Sonix and are available at www.inventionstories.com. Did you start creating Sonix while you were still at Xero, or did you leave and then you were bored and you said, hey, I think I'll do this? How did it go from being just sort of an idea to creating the new business?
Well, I had several ideas before leaving Xero, but I got really excited about voice recognition technology. And there's something about the intersection between sound, language, and technology that just got me really excited. And also the fact that we can help storytellers tell their stories, I find so amazing. So it was a process. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It required some research and fact-finding. But once I saw the technology was as good as it is today, and the number of large companies that are working on perfecting this that we can leverage, it made me think that this is a good space to pursue. And, the whole notion of helping storytellers really strikes for us. And there's so many great people out there that have so many creative stories that we've heard. And I was just wanting to mention this morning. I just got a note from someone saying they've done a documentary about the world's highest soccer game played entirely by females on Mount Kilimanjaro. And so this is a really cool story, and the fact that we can help them build that story and tell it to many people feels really good.
Well, why did you decide to leave Xero? I mean, some people dream of actually making it to the top, and I'm sure if you cut yourself, you probably bleed Xero blood. And how was it to leave that behind, and was it a challenge? Do you miss it dearly? Are you still a consultant?
Yeah, it was a great experience, and I really enjoyed my time at Xero. But what I about is building companies and that growth phase. And Xero had somewhat plateaued, and while they would continue to grow, most of the work had been done and operationalized. So it kind of moves into a more maintenance mode. And while that's interesting to me, it's just not as exciting as building a new company and creating new things for new people. And so, no, I have no regrets leaving. I was excited to leave, but I also had a wonderful time at Xero and met some great people.
And now it's time for a commercial break. You're listening to episode 19 of the Invention Stories Podcast, Jamie Sutherland and Sonix. As I mentioned earlier in the Invention Stories Podcast, we are now sponsored by Socket Saver. For anyone who's ever felt the frustration of your plugs falling out while trying to vacuum or dry your hair, the Socket Saver is for you. And whether you're renting your own home or you own, eliminate this problem for under $10. For more information, please visit www.socketsaver.com. You've done two different things. You've started something from the ground, completely brand new up, and you're doing that again. And then, of course, you went to Xero, which had already been started. And it was more of a growth phase, like you said. Which part of the life cycle do you enjoy working on more? The beginning and getting something completely started, or getting something that's kind of going and then just rocking it from there?
I think they're all great. I think I really enjoy solving complex problems, and the more complex problems and things that are really not easily solved are in the early days of something. And so I feel like that just gets me more interested. Once you've gotten into somewhat more of a maintenance mode, it's a little bit more systematic in what needs to be done. And having done it several times now, it's still great, don't get me wrong. It's just, solving those complex problems seems to get me a bit more excited.
Why did you decide on using the name Sonix? I try to find you sometimes, and I get the guy with the blue hair, or the hedgehog, or whatever, and I've seen a wafer, and I've seen a number of different things. I mean, it seems like you would want to put something in where they put www.thename.com, and it comes up, whereas you've gone with www.sonix.ai. Why did you decide to do that?
So Sonix, that's a great question. Sonix, I decided because I wanted something that represented the sound and technology, and I felt like that was a fair representation of what we were working on. And it literally came to me in the middle of the night, I think, and then when I woke up in the morning, I still liked it, so that was good. And then the .ai relates to artificial intelligence, and what we're seeing is many companies that are using that URL because it represents the new age of technology. Over time, I think we'll probably get to .com, but for now, .ai is working just fine.
I've got some experience with voice recognition. I've been trying to use it. I actually started off with a blog. I posted over 300 stories, and towards the end, I would interview people, and then I'd try to use the voice recognition softwares at the time, and it just didn't work. And I know they've come a long way. How accurate is your product? I'm going to learn, because for this particular podcast, I'm actually going to use your software, but do you get every word right?
No, we don't. And we're very upfront about that. Machines are just not quite there yet. And while we use our own proprietary algorithms to optimize the process, and we also leverage some APIs from some big companies that are working on this technology to optimize the process and result, we just can't get to the same level of accuracy as that is transcribing. It gets really close, and if you have amazing audio quality, then you will be amazed by the result. But what we see is not everybody is well versed in capturing great audio, and because of that, you don't get a perfect transcription. But my view is, like you saw probably a few years ago, the technology just wasn't that good. Today it is good enough, and that's what we're seeing with many of our users. They're impressed with what we're doing. We can speed up the process. We can do it at a more affordable price. And then we've built this whole editing functionality right into the transcript, which they find very useful as well. So yes, it's not as accurate as a human transcription, but we have tools to get it to that state, and that's what our users seem to like.
That's good to know. I was just wondering how accurate it was. Are there any competitors in this space, and how do you have a competitive edge with them?
Well, in the automated transcription space, we continue to get feedback that we are the most accurate. And there was a recent review that you can see online done by Pop-Up Podcasting that ranked us as the most accurate, and we were still in beta at that point. So that's a good sign. There's a few other things that we do in terms of the transcription, and we identify the speakers so users don't have to go through every single bit of dialogue and figure out who's speaking. We do that automatically. And then the other big thing is, we're the lowest price that I've seen, and we charge $8 per transcribed hour.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that next. I watched your speech, and you mentioned you don't charge by the hour because value is not connected to hours, and yet your business model includes this. Why?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I do believe that value is not connected to hours. And for us, we do charge for value, and that is the membership fee that we have for the software that surrounds the transcript. So if you look at how transcription services have traditionally operated, you submit a file and you get a transcript, and that's the end of it. And so that's what I would call, pure transcription, and that's a highly commoditized market. And so knowing that, what we wanted to do was separate out that feature or that functionality and call it transcription. And that's where the $8 an hour comes in. And when markets are commoditized, it's hard to deviate from that kind of a method. But where we stand out is the software we've built around the transcription, and that's the editing body I was talking about. It's a workflow that's built right into the transcript where you can edit, review, highlight, strike through, polish, publish, share, and collaborate. And then we also have more features rolling out every week. So that's where I think the value for service comes into play. But for pure transcription, I believe that's highly commoditized and will become more and more commoditized.
How do you decide on what features to add to it? Do you do market research or?
There's two main ways we do that, and the first is from user feedback. And one of the things I and our team, the other two team members on the executive team are David and Steven, focus on is our current users. So we talk to them a lot. We ask for feedback a lot. We reward our users for feedback. And that informs and prioritizes for us what we should be building next. And that, I would say, is probably 70% of how we direct our roadmaps. The other 30% we think about where do we want to be in the future, and are we building the product in a way that's going to service what we think is the way the market will go. And we may not be user-generated feedback. It may be some feelings we have. It may be something we've seen in a different market that we think would apply to ours. And so we apply that knowledge, and I think what you get is a product that's evolves and surprises and makes people happy, but also meets the current needs of our existing customer base.
It seems like it's a really good market to be going after. I've looked at the podcasting numbers, and there's almost nothing that's similar these days. It's just absolutely exploding. And so I do thank you for taking your time to answer these questions today with me. And which social medias do you use for Sonix?
Yeah, so we have a Twitter address. It's @TrySonix, and we're on that talking, and we'll respond to anybody that tweets at us. We have a Facebook page, but we're less active on that. And then the LinkedIn page is more a personal page of mine that I use for my professional network, but I connect with anybody that wants to on LinkedIn and has any questions about Sonix.
So what's your strategy for educating the public about Sonix?
So we're pretty early, so we haven't done a ton of marketing yet. But in terms of education, what we're focused most is the discussion around search engine optimization, or SEO. And so we started to help podcasters understand why SEO can help drive traffic to their site. And I mentioned that before, is the way that Google works and other search engines work is they can crawl text much better than they can crawl audio. And if Google can find it, then it's indexed, and that means someone searching for something that you may have spoken about will drive you to your site much faster. We actually have a page on our website at sonix.ai/y-transcribe that talks about some of these things around SEO. And the second thing is around capturing great audio, which I mentioned before. The better audio you capture, the more accurate transcripts will be, and this is more automated transcription. And then we also have a page on that. We actually have some of our users that have contributed their insights into the devices and techniques they use to capture great audio. They've recorded, called a quick podcast that we've transcribed. So all that's available on sonix.ai/great-audio.
Other than podcasters, it seems like there would just be a real natural fit for you to be a partner with, like the recording industry, maybe even Apple. They might want to buy you out and put it on their phone or something. Is there some strategic partnerships that would be a good fit for you, or?
There are logical people we would like to work with. I would say we are always having conversations with interested people, but in reality, we're heads down and focused on creating a great experience for customers. And what happens, I think, if you do that is those other conversations become easier. And whether we work with, a larger entity somehow, it's really born out of the fact that we've built something great that users love.
That makes a lot of sense. As a person, Jamie, how do you manage your work-life balance? Are you able to turn it off when you go to sleep? I noticed a lot of entrepreneurs only sleep about 4 hours a night. I keep reading that that's unhealthy and this and that, but it just seems like super successful people don't sleep much.
Entirely true. I know lots of people that can sleep really well and are also very successful. But I do fit into the camp of I don't sleep a lot. And it's not by design, it's just who I am. But I think the reality is if you're working on something that's fun and interesting, you're having a great time, then it doesn't feel like work. And if I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm thinking about something, it's not stress related, it's just because I'm excited about it. And that's it doesn't bother me, it doesn't affect my life, it doesn't impact my family. It's just who I am, and I'm okay with that.
No, it's better than waking up from a nightmare. I mean, if you wake up and you got a great idea, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, when you're growing your business, or maybe just any business in general, what do you think is the best use of time and money?
So I don't think there's a single answer to that question, because every business is a little bit different and have different things that need to be done at different points in time. I think the real key for anyone is to spend time on the things that are most important. And it's really easier said than it is done. And I see it a lot where people just get mired into their email inbox and they aren't really focused on what's most important for their business. And so even if you're at a large company, and you'll hear this a lot more, it's like, what are your top 3 things you should be working on this week, this month, and today? And really be diligent about focus on those things. I think that's what's most important, and that's sort of that's the best use of your time, and that translates into how much cost you're putting into it from a time perspective. And I honestly see it all the time. It's just you get sucked into this vortex of responding to emails and lose sight of what's important.
Yeah, I see people doing that. Not only emails, but just going on social media. They'll sit there for hours on their Facebooks just spinning away. What do you think is not a good use of time and money? What should new entrepreneurs or new inventors, what should they try to avoid doing when they're trying to build their company?
I think it's almost the corollary to the first question, which is around prioritization. Again, it depends on the type of business, the type of market, and what you're doing. But I think a simple thing is to, in the early, focus on solving a problem and a pain for your customers. So whatever you're building, talk to lots of customers and ask them, is this a painful thing for you? Are we solving something that's painful? If the answer is no, then you probably aren't barking up the right tree. And so until you hit on that, I think you got to keep asking that question.
I agree 100%. What for Sonix is your biggest obstacle, and how do you try to overcome it?
The biggest obstacle for us is really just time management, focusing on the right initiatives to move us to the next gate. But I think things are going pretty well, and I wish I had a better answer that's more interesting, but I feel like we've been able to remove obstacles if there's something that gets in our way, at least at this point.
That's good. Thank you, Jamie, for being our guest today. I just have one last question, and that's the question you probably get asked a lot. And what advice would you give to somebody who's starting a business or inventing? What would your advice to them be?
I think if you're just getting started, it's the simple directive of get started. It's inertia that usually is the biggest blocker to doing something. And you just need to start doing something. And I would say talking to lots of people in the space you are pursuing, you'll be amazed how helpful people can be and want to help out if you just ask. And so personally, I learn a ton from others' experiences. And I wouldn't say it's advice all the time. It's people telling you about their experience and how that relates to what you are building can go a long way. And for me, that information can be invaluable.
You've been listening to episode 19 of the Invention Stories Podcast, Jamie Sutherland and Sonix. I want to thank Jamie for being our guest today. More information can be found at www.sonix.ai. Thank you, Jessica Haynes of the Socket Saver, for agreeing to be our first sponsor. So please visit their website at www.socketsaver.com. If you're an inventor who would like to be featured on the Invention Stories podcast, have a suggestion on how we can make this podcast better, or would like to become a sponsor, please contact us at inventionstoriespodcast@gmail.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to write a positive review for us on iTunes. An easy way to get there is to go to www.inventionstories.com/review. More information and show notes can be found at our website, www.inventionstories.com. Thank you very much for listening today, and please tell a friend.